We all love a good movie montage.
Oh, absolutely. The classic training montage.
Right. The hero is struggling, the dramatic music swells, and in like 2 minutes of screen time, they've just completely turned their life around.
Yeah, suddenly they're fluent in a new language or they're running a marathon.
Exactly. But reality just doesn't work that way at all. I mean, massive transformations don't happen overnight.
No, they really don't.
They're hidden in these small, frankly, kind of boring daily choices. So today we're doing a deep dive into the actual unglamorous mechanics of how you rewire your brain for change.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. We're using this incredibly insightful transcript about learning English and personal development as our source today. And our mission is to unpack the psychological barriers that keep you stuck, the math of micro-habits, and how your mindset and environment actually dictate your success.
I love that we're looking at this because, the illusion of sudden success is just so pervasive in our culture, we only ever see the finish line.
Right, we don't see the years of practice.
Exactly, which gives us a completely skewed perception of what it takes to get there. When we look at the data on personal development, whether that's mastering English or, say, changing a fundamental behavior, the people who succeed aren't relying on these massive leaps of faith.
What are they doing instead?
Well, they're systematically dismantling the psychological and biological friction that prevents action.
Okay, so let's start right there with that friction. Because before we can talk about how to change, we have to look at why we wait. Like, why do we procrastinate so much?
Oh, it's the psychological traps. And the most obvious culprit is just fear of failure.
The classic, what if I mess up mentality.
Right. And when we examine that fear, we have to look at what's actually happening in the brain. The amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection center, it doesn't always distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological one.
Wait, really? So it treats them the same?
Pretty much, yeah. So a bruised ego or, the embarrassment of sounding foolish when you're trying to speak a new language, your brain processes those as literal threats to your social survival.
Oh, wow. So you feel like you're in actual danger just from speaking bad English.
Exactly. The brain triggers this powerful avoidance response to protect us from the sting of getting it wrong. We avoid the attempt altogether because our neurobiology is just prioritizing immediate safety over long-term growth.
And I feel like that avoidance usually masquerades as productive procrastination.
Oh, definitely.
You see this all the time when someone decides they want to get fit or learn a new skill. They don't just start, they spend like 6 months researching the absolute best workout program.
Or reading reviews for every single language app on the market.
Yes. They feel like they're making progress because they're planning, but they haven't spent 5 minutes actually doing the thing.
Well, that's because planning provides a premature dopamine hit. Your brain gets the chemical reward of feeling productive without having to actually expend the metabolic energy to do the hard work.
It's basically a closed loop of fake progress.
Exactly. And when that endless planning inevitably doesn't yield real-world results, people fall back on negative self-talk. They do this preemptive surrender, claiming, oh, I'm just not a language person.
Or I don't have the genetics for this.
Yeah.
It's just a convenient narrative that lets you off the hook.
It absolves you of the responsibility of trying.
Right. But there is a deeper trap here, the one that keeps people parked in planning mode indefinitely. And that's the motivation trap. It's this massive misconception that you have to wait for the perfect moment to feel motivated before you start.
That is the biggest myth out there.
I always think of it like sitting in a parked car. You're staring at the steering wheel, waiting for the engine to just start making noise before you decide to turn the key.
That's a great way to put it.
But the car isn't going to make a sound until you physically turn the key. Action has to precede motivation. But let me push back a bit, because if you have zero motivation to begin with, taking that initial action turning the key can feel impossible.
Yeah, bypassing that initial resistance is tough, but you need a specific strategy. And in behavioral psychology, action is the spark. When you complete a task, even a microscopic one, your brain releases a small amount of dopamine.
And that dopamine creates the motivation for the next step.
Right. Motivation is the momentum that builds once the engine is running, not the fuel that starts it. So to bypass that resistance, you shrink the task down until the motivation required is virtually zero.
You make it impossibly small.
Yes. You lower the threshold so much that the amygdala doesn't register it as a threat. If you want to run a marathon but have zero motivation, your action isn't going for a run.
It's just putting on your running shoes.
Exactly. That takes almost no willpower, but completing it triggers that initial dopamine release.
So shrinking the effort down brings us to the math of microhabits. And our source material references James Clear and his concept of atomic habits.
The famous 1% rule.
Right, the 1% rule. The math is wild. If you improve just 1% every day, you aren't 37% better in a year. You are 37 times better.
Human brains deeply struggle to comprehend that kind of math. We evolved in a linear environment, right? If you foraged one berry, you had one berry. If you foraged two, you had two.
We're not wired for compounding interest?
No, we're not. So when you make a 1% improvement, it seems completely invisible in the moment. If you learn one new phrase in English today, you don't feel fluent tonight.
Of course not.
But each 1% builds on the baseline from the previous days. The math is 1.01 to the power of 365, which is roughly 37.7.
It's undeniable. But the source makes this argument that these micro habits like reading for 10 minutes or practicing English for 5 minutes actually reshape your identity over time.
They absolutely do.
See, I want to explore that. How does a tiny 5-minute daily habit fundamentally reshape who you are? On the surface, it just feels like you're tweaking your daily schedule.
Well, it comes down to how the brain constructs a sense of self. Identity isn't something you're just born with. It's an internal narrative constructed through evidence.
Evidence that you gather from your actions?
Right. Have you heard of neuroplasticity?
Yeah, the brain's ability to rewire itself.
Exactly, and it relies heavily on frequency. The foundational rule there is Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together wire together. If you want to be a reader, but you only read once a month on a long flight, your brain doesn't internalize that identity.
Because the frequency is too low. The sample size is too small for the brain to consider it a defining trait.
Precisely. But when you read for just 5 minutes every single day without fail, that daily frequency forces those neural pathways to fire continuously. The sheer volume of consistent evidence convinces your brain, oh, this is just what we do.
You internalize the identity. And once you believe you're a language learner or a reader, the behavior becomes automatic.
You no longer have to use sheer willpower. You're just acting in alignment with who you are.
That shift from willpower to identity means we need to look at our internal wiring. How does our brain process the friction of these new habits? The source talks about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset.
Right, Carol Dweck's work.
Yeah. A fixed mindset assumes talent is static, while a growth mindset believes you can cultivate your capacities.
Yeah.
But the implications on our neurology go way deeper than just like positive thinking, right?
Oh, fundamentally. It alters how your brain interprets failure. In a fixed mindset, if you fail a project or mess up a grammar rule, it's an identity threat. It's proof of your permanent limits.
I'm just bad at this.
Yeah. But in a growth mindset, the brain processes that exact same failure just as data. It's structural feedback.
Yeah.
And the biological mechanism that regulates this is a network in your brainstem called the reticular activating system.
The RAS is fascinating. The RAS is basically the biological filter for your brain.
It is. I mean, at any given second, your central nervous system is bombarded by roughly 11 million bits of sensory information.
11 million.
Yeah. The hum of the fridge, the temperature, the feeling of your clothes. If your conscious brain had to process all of that, it would completely short circuit.
So the RAS acts as the gatekeeper.
Exactly. It filters those 11 million bits down to about 50 bits of conscious awareness, only letting in what it deems important to you.
And it determines what's important based on what you actively focus on. Like the cocktail party effect.
Yes, perfect example.
You're in a loud room, ignoring hundreds of conversations, but the second someone says your name, you hear it instantly. Your RAS flagged your name as highly relevant.
Or if you learn a new word, suddenly you hear it everywhere. The word was always there, your filter was just blocking it.
So I was thinking about this, and the RAS operates a lot like a social media algorithm.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to look at it.
Right. If you click on content that says, I'm terrible at this, the algorithm, your brain, just feeds you more of that exact evidence all day long.
It highlights every awkward interaction and every mistake, pushing them to the front of your awareness. Because you programmed it to search for proof of your incompetence.
But you can physically alter the search terms. If you shift your focus to, I am improving, the algorithm flips.
It starts scanning the environment for progress and opportunities.
And people use techniques like positive affirmations to do this, which, are often dismissed as kind of cheesy.
Yeah, fluffy self-help.
Right. But in the context of the RAS, They are literal directives to the gatekeepers in your brainstem.
You're giving it a new set of instructions. Visualization does the exact same thing. The brain doesn't rigidly distinguish between a vividly imagined event and a real one.
Wow, so visualizing success lowers the amygdala's fear response.
It does. It fires the same neural circuits as if you were actually doing it. And a daily gratitude practice works similarly. It's not just about feeling happy. It's a structural retraining of the RAS.
You're forcing the algorithm to scan for positive data points.
Which permanently alters your baseline perception of the world.
Okay, but even if your RAS is perfectly tuned and you've broken your habits into 1% increments, there is still a physical reality you have to face.
The moment of truth.
The moment you open your mouth to speak that new language or hit publish, the fear of sounding foolish kicks in and people freeze. They wait until they feel completely ready.
And that is the fallacy of readiness. It's this deeply ingrained illusion that if we just study a little more, we'll cross a magical threshold where all our anxiety just dissipates.
But neurological confidence doesn't precede action.
Never. Confidence is the byproduct of surviving the action. Progress must come before confidence.
Done is better than perfect. We hear that a lot in startup culture, but it applies so perfectly here. Imperfect action gives you actual data.
Perfect inaction gives you nothing.
But let me stress test that idea. Done is better than perfect.
Right.
Always true. Like if you're learning English and you mangle the grammar so badly in a conversation that it's deeply embarrassing, doesn't that negative experience set your progress back?
It's a natural concern, but it ignores how the brain actually learns. In cognitive neuroscience, there's a concept called prediction error.
Prediction error.
Yeah. When you're learning a skill, your brain predicts how a sentence should be structured. If you get it perfectly right, your brain just confirms what it already knows. Very little new neural mapping happens.
Oh, I see.
It's only when you make a mistake, when there's an error in the prediction, that the brain releases a cocktail of neuromodulators signaling the need to wire a new pathway.
So making the mistake is a biological requirement for learning.
Absolutely. The embarrassment is entirely temporary, but those new neural pathways are permanent.
I like to think of embarrassment as essentially a toll booth on the road to fluency. You have to pay the toll of being a little uncomfortable to get onto the highway of mastery.
That's a great analogy. Delaying action out of perfectionism just starves your brain of the prediction errors it actually needs.
Okay, so we've covered the internal landscape, neuroplasticity, the RAS algorithm, prediction errors, but none of this happens in a vacuum. External forces play a massive role too.
They can accelerate the rewiring or completely sabotage it.
The source brings up the 5 people rule, the idea that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
And the science behind that is rooted in mirror neurons and emotional contagion. Humans are profoundly social creatures.
We naturally mimic the people around us.
Without even realizing it. We continuously scan the people around us and absorb their emotional states, their stress levels, even their baseline dopamine.
So if you're trying to implement a 1% daily habit, but you're surrounded by cynical people,
You unconsciously absorb their neurological baseline. It creates immense friction.
it's like trying to run a marathon while wearing a weighted vest.
Exactly. Conversely, being around goal-driven people pulls you forward.
But let's look at the practical reality for a listener. What if you're stuck in a highly pessimistic workplace or you have really cynical family members? You can't just quit your job or abandon your family tomorrow.
No, that's the reality for most people, which is why you have to interpret environment much more broadly than just the physical bodies in the room.
So what do?
You actively supplement it by curating a high-quality digital and intellectual environment. You have to aggressively protect your headspace.
Limit the outrage-driven news and draining social media.
Right. If you can't change the coworker sitting next to you, you can control what's playing in your headphones.
You can spend your commute listening to an uplifting podcast or reading a transformative book. And those authors and hosts effectively become part of your 5 people.
You're borrowing their momentum. Their perspectives begin to recalibrate your mirror neurons.
By selecting the voices you let into your head, you create a growth environment that makes the right behaviors easier regardless of where you physically are.
Precisely.
So when we step back and look at the anatomy of change, the grand takeaway is actually incredibly empowering. You don't need a massive overnight leap of faith.
You don't need a cinematic montage.
You just need to recognize the biological friction. like the amygdala's fear response or the dopamine trap of waiting for motivation.
And bypass it by shrinking your actions down to that 1% level.
You train your brain's reticular activating system to hunt for progress, and you curate an environment that pulls you forward. So we have a challenge for you today, not tomorrow, not next Monday, today.
Take one impossibly small step on a goal you've been postponing.
Put on the running shoes, read one page, speak one imperfect sentence in English, just turn the key.
That single tiny action provides the undeniable evidence your brain needs to start shifting your identity.
As we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time today talking about how the brain's RAS finds exactly what you tell it to look for, operating just like an algorithm.
It's always searching based on your inputs.
Right. So, based on the passing thoughts, the worries, and the self-talk you've engaged in so far today, what are you unknowingly instructing your brain's algorithm to search for right now?
Are you programming it to find reasons to stay stuck or to find that 1%?
A question definitely worth answering. Until next time, keep diving deep.